Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us for this latest edition of our ISGAN webinar. My name is Daniel Webben. I'm the manager of the communications working group for ISGAN, and I'm just going to introduce a little bit about ISGAN before we get to the webinar. So if you don't know already, ISGAN stands for the International Smart Grid Action Network. And today we're going to be talking about recommendations for harmonizing the electricity grid. But we are a cooperative program underneath both the International Energy Agency and the Clean Energy Ministerial. This is an initiative that started in 2011, and our goal is to create a strategic platform to support high-level government attention and action for the accelerated deployment of smarter, cleaner electricity grids around the world. Currently, we consist of 27 contracting parties. They are nominated representatives, form the executive committee headed by the Presidium, assisted by two co-secretariats and the operating agent of ISGAN, which is currently the co-secretariat is located in Korea, and the other co-secretariat is located at the Austrian Institute of Technology. Here you have kind of a layout of the different working groups that we operate with: flexibility markets, ISGAN Academy, smart grid transitions, power T&D systems, smart grid international research, and synthesis of insights for decision makers. Our vision is to accelerate progress on key aspects of smart grid policy, technology, and investment through voluntary participation by governments and their designees in specific projects and programs. Our activities center foremost on the aspects of smart grid where governments have regulatory authority, expertise, convening power, other leverage, focusing on these 5 principal areas: policy standards and regulation, finance and business models, technology system development, workforce skills and knowledge, users and consumer engagement, and finally, ISGAN facilitates dynamic knowledge sharing, technical assistance, peer review, and where appropriate, project coordination and management among the contracting parties. Our value proposition and what we're trying to continue is obviously things like these webinars, but we also publish discussion papers and case books and technology briefs. And then we hold workshops and conference presentations. And we also publish technical papers. And all of these publications are usually announced on our LinkedIn page and also on the website for ISGAN. What you're involved in today, the virtual learning, tries to bring together high-level engineers and decision makers and provide rational and efficient continuous technical skills to complement the upgrades in the field of smart grids. We have these e-learning core modules that deal with the entire value chain of the smart grid, and we provide further reading as appendices. And all of these webinars are organized. We try to do them every 2 months, and they're co-hosted with the Clean Energy Solutions Center. So today, we're going to have a presentation, recommendations to pave the way for harmonized European flexibilities markets. It's reporting on the results of the last 3 years. INTERRFACE and CoordiNet have been investigating the best ways for TSO-DSO-consumer coordination with regards to flexibility. Today, they're going to provide their joint recommendations to developing flexibility markets in Europe based on the experience in their large-scale demonstrations. The speakers today, we have Konstantinos, Kotsalos, who is an R&D energy engineer for Year in Dynamics for INTERRFACE, Sebastian Vogel, Junior Projects Officer for the DSO for CoordiNet, and a moderator, Gianluca Lipari, Research Associate at the Fraunhofer FIT for OneNet. I want to remind you to please use the Q&A tool to pose questions. The speakers will answer at the end of the presentation, and the recording will be available shortly through the ISGAN channel. So with that, I'll turn it over to the moderator, Gianluca, and he will introduce today's subject. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel, and welcome everyone also from my side. As you can see, today the agenda will cover the two projects, as Daniel already explained, so CoordiNet and INTERRFACE. We will have the introduction to the projects, and then on the coordination and collaboration that the two projects did carry out. Before that, I will just maybe give a little bit of background for those who are not familiar with the projects. Both the projects, CoordiNet and INTERRFACE focused on setting up markets and digital platforms for system operators, both transmission and distribution system operators, in a way that would allow them to procure grid services from suppliers, aggregators, and individual consumers eventually. The goal of both projects was to demonstrate how these technologies, the services, and the platform could perform in real-life pilots. This also, of course, included understanding from the perspective of the suppliers or the consumers how they could offer or their assets could be used to deliver these services to the system operators at a large scale, so having an impact on the system operation. While both projects focused on designing and implementing protocols, the platforms, the services for the procurement of flexibility, so defining them and then demonstrating them in real-life operation. Each project had, however, let's say, a slightly different angle to look at the challenge. While CoordiNet was a little bit more distribution system oriented, INTERRFACE, on the other hand, was coming from a TSO transmission point of view. So the added value of the collaboration of the two projects is exactly being somehow complementary to each other. And this is also reflected in the common activities that they carried out, including the joint paper they prepared, and that is the foundation of today's webinar. Indeed, the two presenters we have today will introduce their respective projects and then go into the details of the challenges for TSO-DSO and customer coordination, how they identified these challenges, and what are their approaches or recommendations. Having said that, we can dive into the very first presentation. Again, I will just remind everyone to please use the Q&A section for asking the questions. We will try to answer them at the end of the presentations. And I would leave the floor to our first presenter, Sebastian Vogel from EDSO, that is represented CoordiNet project. So Sebastian, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Gianluca. So the CoordiNet project, it began 3 years ago in 2019, and it actually just ended last month with an event here in Brussels. It encompassed 23 partners, which you can see here on this side with all these logos from all over Europe. Just to give you an idea who these logos are, that's 3 transmission system operators, 5 distribution system operators, 6 research centers and universities. Then our EDSO, the Association of DSOs, a technology provider, and 3 energy service companies and independent aggregators. And we also had 4 solution providers. And on top of these 23 partners, there were 10 linked third parties. All of this happened in 3 demo areas in Spain, Sweden, and Greece, which we will talk about in a second on the next slide. So the goals of CoordiNet were threefold. First, we wanted to demonstrate economic, security, and environmental benefits of TSO-DSO coordination through the implementation of 3 large-scale demos. Secondly, the project aimed at defining and testing a set of standardized products for grid services. And finally, develop a TSO-DSO-consumer cooperation platform, which would eventually pave the way to an interoperable pan-European flexibility market. So the next slide, please. Matteo. Yeah, thanks. Here on the left side, we see the 3 demo countries, Spain, Sweden, and Greece, with the respective business use cases, of which we will also talk very soon. So looking at the Spanish demonstration, it focused mostly on including FSPs on all voltage levels and provide services to DSOs and TSOs in a coordinated manner. The Swedish demonstration explored mainly 2 business use cases to support economic growth in urban areas. They looked into ways to solve grid constraints with flexibility service by a centralized market platform for the DSOs. What I think is fascinating here is that they did this with a blockchain P2P market platform. And finally, in Greece, a focus was put on voltage control through a local market, which enabled particularly small market players and aimed at facilitating their role in the management and operation of the power system. This is everything in a nutshell. So if you want to read more about this, please look at our website. There are 2 great deliverables on this, but later in the references more on that. So yeah, on the next slide, we will dive more into the business use cases here. I already touched upon them very briefly. Here we see an overview in a broader context. On the left, there are the 4 tested services: balancing, control, congestion management, control islanding, and voltage control. And on the top, we see the time frames. Then next to it, explored market model schemes and product types. But feel free to have a closer look. By testing all of these business use cases in the 3 demo areas or demo regions, the CoordiNet project defined 3 major things. First, a set of standardized products with common harmonized characteristics across Europe for the exchange of identified grid services. Secondly, a classification of service agnostic coordination schemes. And thirdly, business use cases for the demonstrations in relation to the tested services, products, and coordination schemes. But yeah, to read more about this and get some more insights into the overall results, I suggest looking at deliverable on the economic assessment. It's a great paper, deliverable 6.3, if somebody's interested. And that being said, I would give the floor to Konstantinos to talk a bit about the INTERRFACE project.
Thank you, Sebastian. Hello, everyone also from my side. So in the next slides, I will give you some overview about the INTERRFACE project. So INTERRFACE project is a 48 months project. We started in January 2019, and it will essentially finish January 2023. It addresses the same objective as the CoordiNet project, as said previously by Gianluca. It comprises of 42 partners, and to give you a picture about these logos, the consortium of INTERRFACE project is a heavily industry-driven basically project with 7 TSOs, 8 DSOs, the European Transmission System Operator Association, and 200 suppliers, 2 ESCOs, 1 market operator, 9 service technology providers, 9 research partners, and an international organization, the European University Institute. The overall budget of INTERRFACE project is about 20.9 million, which was granted under AC 2020 projects with a EU grant of about 17 million. So if we go to the next slide to have a look on an overview of the strategic objectives of the INTERRFACE project. So INTERRFACE aims to remove the barriers in the European power system sector, to drive coordination through digitization, to increase transparency and interoperability, to bring consumer to the center by combining local markets and congestion management markets with wholesale and balancing markets, and to create new business opportunities. So all these different pillars are done by creating a common architecture, connecting market platforms to establish a seamless pan-European electricity exchange framework, by defining also and demonstrating standardized products, key parameters, and activation and settlement processes for the energy services delivered, drive the collaboration in the procurement of grid services between TSOs and DSOs, and to create strong incentives to connected customers, integrate small and large-scale assets to increase market liquidity, and of course, all this is by promoting the state-of-the-art digital technologies that consumers are familiar with in everyday life, with e-auctions, e-commerce, and e-banking activities. If we go to the next slide to have a look on the development of the INTERRFACE project, from here we can understand that the implementation of the INTERRFACE project into the large-scale demonstrators is basically clustered in three main pillars, these three different colors as you can see. The demo area one, which is the congestion management and balancing issues, which is to mitigate congestions and activate local flexibility resources for system balancing services through ISGAN, the core platform of INTERRFACE project, which is operated by TSOs and DSOs in a coordinated fashion. In this first cluster, we have three subsequent demos. The first one, which is the DSO and Consumer Alliance, which essentially implements a centralized energy management system for microgrids. The intelligent distribution nodes, which basically is for the grid services management system for flexible mid-voltage, low-voltage networks, as well as the simple flexibility platform, which basically demonstrates the EXA platform with the Exchange platform as a core for distributed flexibilities in end-to-end electricity networks. Then we go to the second pillar, the peer-to-peer trading, which is the one to test the state-of-the-art digital technologies such as blockchain for peer-to-peer energy transactions, promoting local markets and smart asset management. So this is comprised of two demos: the asset-enabled local markets, which delivers basically microgrid local electricity markets using the assets capabilities, and a pure blockchain one, blockchain-based TSO-DSO flexibility with a concept of a market platform with smart contracts and smart billing. Finally, we have the demo area 3, which is the pan-EU clearing market, which is to promote, which aims to promote the integration of distributed energy sources into the electricity markets and demonstrate mechanisms that can lead to the establishment of a single pan-European market. This is also comprised of two demos. The first one, distributed energy sources into a wholesale market, which basically implements a retail to wholesale market approach for distributed energy source integration. And finally, a spatial aggregation of local flexibilities with an Euphemia-based market platform to engage local flexibility resources. So you can see also the map of the distribution of the different demos of INTERRFACE project. That was more or less a wrap-up of the INTERRFACE project implementation. Of course, you can see more information throughout our webpage and, of course, throughout our public deliverables too. We can continue with the next slide.
So now we've heard briefly about CoordiNet and INTERRFACE, but let's talk about a joint collaboration, which began around Christmas 2019 with an agreement on a common position paper. So then we began aligning our views on standardized grid services, products, and key parameters for flexibility service provider engagement. And we also conducted a joint analysis of the active system management report and alternatives. That was the first step. The second step of our collaboration was to define the content of this composition paper. We based this on demo experiences of both projects regarding scalability and replicability on an EU level. Thereby, a focus was put on connection and management of distributed flexibility resources, platforms for the implementation of coordination schemes, and last but not least, roles and processes of market and system actors. Finally, we finalized the recommendations in a common position paper, which we will also link in the end of the presentation again, at least the draft version for now. We had many meetings and discussions to share knowledge between both projects and aligned our common stances on lessons learned. Eventually, we identified 7 thematic areas and formulated 17 joint recommendations, but this is more from Konstantinos. On the next slide.
So essentially, as Gianluca presented in the very beginning, both projects are addressing the same goal, TSO-DSO-consumer coordination, throughout large-scale demonstrations of innovative grid services. So we have basically the procurement of flexibility services, and the actual challenge is to bring all these different actors to work in a coordinated manner. So both projects have contributed in several different aspects, but in this last phase of the delivery of the projects, we have thought that these 7 different thematic topics that we will jointly present you some recommendations with Sebastian, which are basically the content of our joint paper. We feel that if they're fundamental blocks towards the harmonization of flexibility processes in the pan-European context. And so these 7 topics are firstly, the roles and responsibilities, the requirements for information sharing, requirements of pre-qualification process and requirements of settlement processes, geographical scope and network representation, consumer engagement, and scalability and replicability. We all feel, we feel that all these different thematic areas are equally important. So we will go throughout these recommendations that we have jointly proposed with CoordiNet paper in the very next slide. So we would start with the first thematic area in the next slide that will be presented by Sebastian.
So yeah, here we have the first area, yeah, why are roles and responsibilities important as such an area? From the CoordiNet perspective, rather than aiming to define the attribution of roles to specific market actors, we investigated more the fundamental principles behind such a choice. And that was also important to INTERRFACE. So such fundamental principles are listed here on this slide. First, we have to allow a transparent and non-discriminatory coordination among market participants and national authorities. We should further enable new business processes and models for efficient flexibility procurement, but also ensure timely and secure information exchange, transparency, and avoidance of cost obligation. Another principle is to reduce insecurity among market stakeholders. And finally, the needs of specific market actors should all be addressed. And these principles led us to the following recommendations on the next slide. So the first one is that we want a harmonization of the nomenclature and definition of roles, which is required to enable flexibility markets across the EU. And the attribution of such roles and responsibilities should be based on thorough impact analyses. So what's important here is that there are differences in local contexts. There are differences in regulation and there are differences in use cases. So there are no one-size-fits-all solution. But still, for the facilitation of new roles to support markets, yeah, we should explore new roles. This is important, for instance, for cross-sector flexibility. But we also have to look at impacts on other voltage levels and therefore also means of communication. The second recommendation is that amidst the rising complexity, no, it's still on this slide, but yeah, thanks. Amidst the rising complexity of flexibility market, the distribution of costs among procuring entities must be a core element for future regulatory design. So the procurement of flexibility by multiple system operators could introduce coordination issues, as the complexity of tracing back each services causes effects and also costs could increase. And the third recommendation regarding roles and responsibilities is that awareness must be raised, considering that there is no one-size-fits-all technical solution supporting decision-making for all flexibility market stakeholders. 2 thoughts on this. The extension of already existing tools to all voltage levels is not an easy to adopt solution in the short term, as all frameworks developed for these tools do not take all other stakeholders always into consideration. So we have to work on this. It has to mature. And secondly, the emerging information needs for the establishment of flexibility markets should be enabled by common approaches to communicate, for communication between system operators. Yeah, and that being said, I'll give the floor again to Konstantinos.
So, okay, in this slide, we proceed with the next thematic topic, which is the importance of information sharing. So far in the presentation of both projects, we've seen that the long-term objective of both projects is essentially to coordinate, to bring together several different energy stakeholders in order to facilitate the scale-up of different markets, platforms, ensuring essentially interoperability, proper interoperability levels for all these systems to interoperate, ultimately paving the way for the creation of a potential pan-European platform. So spanning for flexibility from all levels essentially implies the coordination of multiple systems, actors, roles, and basically data and information is the key. So new stakeholders are basically already introduced in the energy value chain. And essentially there is a radical change on the landscape of the electricity sector. So, since the term of data marketplace is ongoingly introduced as well in this frame. So for this purpose, we have again the coordinated operation of different assets and actors. We have the fostering of digitalization of the power sector. So data marketplaces are again in the core of this frame and concept. And we have the ongoingly bridging of TSO and DSO, of course, with the remainder energy stakeholders that they are entering this energy landscape, such as flexibility service providers, actual consumers, in order to implement cross-border or even cross-sector flexibility integration. So if we go in the very next slide to see the joint recommendations of the paper. So we can see the recommendations for the information sharing. So essentially in the first pillar, we have the improved data sharing frameworks, that there's need for improved data sharing frameworks for all stakeholders. And this is a necessity actually in order to cover the emerging information needs for the establishment of flexibility markets. This element needs also the increasing harmonization of communication protocols and most importantly, data exchange harmonized messages by standard data profiles. Of course, taking advantage of existing international data profiles. And this is essentially quite crucial in order to accommodate and ensure effective participation of all these new actors in this new market or energy ecosystem in general. Also, in this first pillar, we have the common approach that needs to be taken towards the European framework for interoperability. The second pillar, which essentially is to consistently safeguard the development of increasingly complex frameworks for data sharing between all market stakeholders, ensuring, of course, GDPR and data privacy and ownership policies. This is recommended to take place by guaranteeing data privacy and security and data access that needs to be thoroughly defined for any data or information exchange by means of, for instance, of data policy enforcement tools or consent management information, as well as with the creation of an energy data space within the framework of the common European project of Gaia-X, or the so-called European Data Spaces Association that is currently adopted by the European Union. We will continue with the next thematic area that will be presented from Sebastian.
So the third one is pre-qualification process requirements, and they are important to you for reasons. So we have to relieve market access barriers and reduce market complexity. We have to guarantee neutrality towards different flexibility service providers and their needs, and increase the efficiency of the overall procurement process. And the fourth point is decrease equipment and management costs for providers. The simplification and automation of pre-qualification processes have the potential to eventually facilitate the scaling up of flexibility markets. So the minimum level of standardization of the process at the European level for different flexibility products for DSOs and TSOs has also the potential to relieve market access barriers and also ensure the fulfillment of non-discriminatory requirements, which was also required by EU regulation. And this brings us to two major recommendations on the next slide. So the first one is pre-qualification processes of flexibility markets should be harmonized and simplified at product level across flexibility service and market platforms to lower entry barriers for FSPs, flexibility service providers, and increase market liquidity. So the points I mentioned before in the last slide underline the need for harmonization. But this does not imply that standardization of pre-qualification between all the products is recommended or actually even possible. There are differences in specific products and characteristics, but we still have to strive for it. It is about the harmonization of pre-qualification processes across services, aligned in common definitions and a minimum set of attributes, which should allow for a degree of customization suitable to each product's characteristics. This is also important to prevent gaming and undesired arbitrage between flexibility and energy markets. And the second recommendation is that a level playing field should be created to ensure non-discriminatory pre-qualification processes that grant access to flexibility markets while technology-neutral approach is guaranteed. This also hints at the type of flexibility offered. So for instance, generation, storage, or demand side, but also resource size, including cases of small distributed energy resources and aggregation of small scale units. And thirdly, the degree of digitalization of these examples. Then we're coming to the fourth thematic area with Konstantinos again.
Thank you, Sebastian. To connect a little bit the dots, okay, now we will discuss about settlement process requirements. But to connect a little bit the dots, we discussed about data sharing, which basically we have the different actors sharing information between themselves. So essentially, we can assume that we have the sharing of bid information, distributed energy resource structural data, sort of such as like this information. Then we had also the pre-qualification processes, which is basically for the actual assessment of the available flexibility. And now we have a very important process, which is a subsequent step as also defined in the ASM report of NSOE. We have the settlement, which is an essential process to complete all these flexibility procurement, which is essentially the next step after the activation of volumes or capacities. So settlement is a quite complex process. It's becoming more and more complex and challenging nowadays because we have the involvement of new flexibility projects with the increasing penetration of the distributed energy resources. And this adds essential complexity to the verification and the settlement process required by flexibility markets compared to the typical traditional reserve and wholesale markets. Concurrently, we have the fulfillment of settlement processes requires basically several different data, monitoring data on grid parameters, the collection of real-time telemetry measurements or calculated values from the DRs, as of course communicated by each provider, balance provider, with necessary, of course, granularity and frequency, depending, of course, on the flexibility service that we have in consideration. So the accuracy of these measurements needs to be in a coordinated within balances calculations from the balance responsible parties. And generally, this completes the flexibility procurement process. So although we have already defined telemetry requirements that they are specified at the EU level, allowing for a certain degree of standardization for the settlement process, there is need for further harmonization and definition of the minimum requirements and data access regulation that are applied more beyond the national levels. So in the next slide that we will see the recommendations from the project, from the joint paper. We have the first pillar, which is the guidelines regarding the real-time telemetry that should be harmonized, as I also previously, addressing factors such as data quality and granularity of the measurements in order to enable an harmonized settlement process at EU level. We have also the very important issue of that each flexibility process is characterized or defined by different attributes, including preparation time, time of activation, which essentially determines the telemetry requirements. So, for instance, we have fast flexibility products that are activated in a couple of seconds, but of course have different time characterization requirements for the products that they are activated in half an hour or even hours. Therefore, the telemetry requirements should not be harmonized across all products, but rather across all kinds of products. In the second recommendation, we have essentially the need to increase the trust among all stakeholders, transparency in data exchanges, necessary for the settlement process flexibility markets. And this needs to be ensured because we have more and more actors that are taking place in there. And this can be achieved with two elements. First and most importantly, we need to define how to ensure the non-discriminatory treatment of small distributed resources that they stem from the low voltage distribution networks, for whom the complex settlement and data exchange requirements might pose a heavy burden for the operation of the settlement process. Secondly, how to enable independent aggregation while managing the responsibilities of different actors and entails an added complexity of data collection. Essentially, when it comes to independent aggregation of flexibility, the definition of an accurate baseline is strongly connected to the determination of a proper correction and compensation models. So essentially statistical models that are related to BRP imbalances caused by the aggregator's action. And this basically clearly depends on the terms and conditions of the balancing services that are defined at a national level. And now we have to shift towards a EU frame for the settlement process. We will continue with the next thematic area. Sebastian will present.
So the next one is geographical scope and network representations, the fifth one. So two more to go after this. So the reliable and secure operation of power systems needs to consider technical constraints imposed by TSOs and DSOs. This is, for instance, about line flow and voltage limitations, but also about market clearing problems, which always depend on network topology and system state. So therefore, any recommendation we could make has to ensure the optimal selection of bits and an increased provision of flexibility, attain a manageable level of computational complexity, guarantee grid security and quality of supply, and safeguard the core business of system operators. And fourth point, foster improved grid observability at all voltage levels and smart meter rollout. So this brings us to two recommendations again on the next slide. The first one being adequate requirements for network information sharing should be chosen to ensure the optimal operation selection of bits in flexibility markets, while those must not hinder grid security and the core responsibilities of SO system operators. So we have to find a balance between high accuracy of network information sharing, the optimal selection of bits, and increasing provision of flexibility from distributed energy resources. And on the other side, complexity in terms of computational time requirements, which might also compromise the safe and secure operation of the overall power system. What also plays in there is the confidentiality of grid information, and that eventually system operators are responsible for all of what happens on their grids. So the second recommendation is that guidelines on observability requirements should be developed to promote and accelerate the deployment of monitoring and measurement tools to improve digitalization and grid observability. So a high number of participants and bids makes it increasingly challenging to guarantee safe grid operation. So we have to do something about this. Grid observability, especially at low voltage levels, as hinted at before already, will play a key role in this and in the detection of technical constraints and also congestion issues. And thereby, smart meters are important. They should be promoted in distribution systems, and we should also strive for standards for processes and power of attorney issues, which should be developed for or should be established between system operators and FSPs. So yeah, with the next slide, we'll look at, Konstantinos again.
So yeah, the next one, the next thematic area refers to consumer engagement. So it was, as it was already discussed, it is an important part of both project scope to demonstrate how consumers of different kinds and sizes can utilize their assets and devices connected into the grid in order to deliver flexibility services to both TSOs and DSOs. And of course, this is a clear recommendation that is reported in the clean energy package, which aims basically to enable an active role for consumers into the energy system. So basically, to facilitate the role and enhance the role of the consumer engagement, both projects have enabled also the cascading funding mechanism and made available into the call more and more third parties in order to gain more insights about the consumer perspective. Why the consumers are important to be a part of the energy value chain. They are an important component of all this energy landscape because more and more distributed energy sources of whatever size are integrated and installed in the distribution network grids, which basically raise an important part of spatial temporal flexibility. It is also important to integrate the consumers as system players, ensuring their participation in the energy value chain in a transparent, secure, and most importantly, democratic manner, with different also formulation, local energy communities, citizen energy communities. So for this paper, we have to promote the cooperation among TSOs, DSOs, and of course, consumers. And this is important to be delivered with an increased level of awareness and understanding of the potential benefits of flexibility provision that can be delivered to the consumers when participating into the provision of flexibility. If we go to the next slide to see the recommendations of the joint paper, we will see that it is again delivered in some clusters. In the first cluster, we have the clear and reliable information for flexibility service providers and independent aggregators in markets, including services, products, and different coordination schemes that have to be promoted by consumers' acceptance of potential impacts on comfort level or the perceived ease of use and integration in everyday life that will have an important impact on the flexibility service implementation. The fact that flexibility service providers as a mediator of the consumer essentially implies the need for a clear regulatory framework for the participation in the energy market, the flexibility energy markets, that could motivate the provision of flexibility. In the second pillar, where we have the measures that have to be taken to ensure the transparency in and across the flexibility markets, including, of course, market operations and bid selection processes, in order to increase the confidence and interest of flexibility service providers, aggregators, and consumers. And this, again, needs to be implemented with clear and transparent market signals and flexibility needs, so that FSPs can position themselves in flexibility markets and, of course, establish more and more contractual relationships with the consumers' strengths. Also, to streamline the access into the flexibility markets for all players, even for those that they are coming from the low levels of the grid. Finally, we have the policies tackling flexibility markets with considering also incentives to attract new FSPs and strengthen their role and endorse long-term planning to safeguard business sustainability and security of operation in the energy value chain, interacting, of course, with other stakeholders such as aggregators and end users. And this can be delivered with the implementation of the so-called local energy communities or citizen energy communities in different formulations, of course, with monetary and non-monetary incentives, as well as with different types of flexibility service providers, which are key participants in the energy value chains, those flexibility service providers can appear in the energy value chains with different business models and, of course, different contractual relations that they can be assigned with consumers. That being said, we go with the last thematic topic of recommendations that will be presented by Sebastian.
Scalability and replicability. I think the core goal of any innovation action. So concerning the CoordiNet and the INTERRFACE projects, we shared 5 common determinators. First, support use cases influenced by local and national context. So climate, geography, network topologies, location of production and consumption sites by means of product harmonization. Secondly, achieve cross-platform integration at EU level, lower flexibility costs through TSO-DSO cooperation, tackle barriers posed by national regulatory frameworks, and pave the way towards mature flexibility markets. So all of this was hinted at already in previous recommendations, but it's important to put it together here again for scalability and replicability. The INTERRFACE project tackled this issue more by a top-down approach, to CoordiNet more of a bottom-up approach, but we still ended up with the same recommendations here, which we will see on the next slide. With 3 recommendations actually. So the first one is product and process harmonization should be regarded as means to facilitate the emergence of tailored business cases and models. So factors as mentioned as climate, geography, network topologies, location of production, consumption sites have all different but also direct impacts on applicable use cases. That means we have different results and different needs on grids. And this also leads to different business models. To achieve a level of cross-platform integration that also allows for the adoption of specific data requirements and use cases, we also need a product and process harmonization. And the third point I noted here is that flexibility might only partially solve emerging grid criticalities, and therefore we should also be looking for other complementary solutions. The second recommendation here is knowledge sharing and cooperation between TSOs and DSOs, which should be promoted as enabler of the scaling up and replication of flexibility solutions. So the roles of system operators should be developed following the evolution of energy markets, which are evolving constantly, rapidly. But it should always be accounted for in the context of cooperation between TSOs and DSOs. That's core to it. We've seen that joint TSO and DSOs markets could lead to lower flexibility costs. That's what everybody wants in the end. The third recommendation is that barriers posed by national regulations to the implementation of market-based flexibility solutions should be addressed with paramount importance. So a lack of harmonization and market-oriented definitions for congestion management and voltage control has to be tackled. Something has to be done there. We need enhanced TSO and DSO coordination for certain market models. And also, we have to address a lack of TSO regulatory frameworks, which could enable flexibility procurement. We need adequate incentives and remuneration schemes for system operators to foster the practice of flexibility service procurement as an alternative for reinforcing grid infrastructure, or at least postponing it. And that being said, I would give the floor to a wrap up by Konstantinos.
Thank you, Sebastian. Yes, so we have now concluded the different recommendations that are from the 7 different thematic areas. So we have discussed the fruits that stem from this collaborative work between CoordiNet and INTERRFACE project. And it's very important to say again that both projects brought together their common and complementary learnings and consolidated into policy recommendations throughout the timeline of the delivery of both projects into these 3 last years. And actually this joint paper is the third joint work of both works. So, so far we have discussed and realized that the experiences of all the large-scale demonstrations of the two projects disclosed already several barriers that are essentially impeding the uptake and upscale of harmonized flexibility markets across Europe. And for this purpose, we have gone through these selected, let's say, thematic areas in order to propose some recommendations in order to overcome or promote or propose some enablers opposite to these barriers, and essentially promote the flexibility procurement with inclusion also of the consumer engagement. So as a high level, let's say, wrap up, we have these 3 main pillars: the coordination among energy system stakeholders, and we have discussed that there are ongoingly more and more new energy stakeholders that are appearing in the energy landscape. We have the harmonization of definition, processes, and best practices across the EU. And of course, the empowerment of current and new potential market actors. All those, they are, let's say, the common ground of all these different thematic areas that, as said also in the beginning, they're equally important for the uptake and unleash of flexibility procurement in the energy landscape. I think this is more or less a wrap up so that we have some time for discussion. I think Sebastian probably have some more slides for the resources, correct?
Yeah, but very briefly, like if you want to read more, here are some resources and also the link to the joint paper. It's currently a draft version, but we'll upload the final recommendation paper hopefully next week, and then you should find it here with this link.
Okay, thanks Konstantinos and Sebastian for the nice presentation. I see that there is already a question in the Q&A session. I invite everyone again to please ask questions in the Q&A session. I would maybe start with a question from my side that somehow also connects to one that was posed by the audience. You, Sebastian, but you both mentioned the flexibility and the role it has. You also, Sebastian, said it's part of the equation. It's not the only thing needed, or there are other also complementary things needed. My question would be, could you elaborate a little bit on what is the role of flexibility, and eventually what are the gaps that you see that should be covered by other aspects or solutions? Can be technical, can be regulatory aspects. And also how do you see the stakeholders, the different stakeholders, how they can participate in flexibility, and what are their benefits, why they should be involved in flexibility? If both of you can answer, I don't know, maybe Sebastian, you want to start first?
Okay. Yeah, I think like the core takeaway for me is that flexibility allows us to postpone grid and reinforcement. It makes electricity usage more efficient, and that's what we should strive for. On the other side, it also adds an additional element to fighting climate change, which should be the overarching goal of everything that we're doing here. But it also has a direct impact on customers by making the prices of electricity more manageable. And also regarding customers, it could allow for better understanding of their energy consumption behavior. So I think there are many aspects from grid level to individual level that all just underline how important flexibility could be. But Konstantinos, please add something.
Yeah, so undoubtedly we need flexibility, and now the question is how we can really get this flexibility throughout all the levels of the different levels of the grid. And most importantly, which is the most challenging part that we have discussed, is to span flexibility from the lower levels of the grid, so low levels distribution networks. So the gaps are many, and of course, we have already discussed many of them in the different thematic areas. And most importantly, as a key message probably, is that we cannot say that we can we have to prioritize any of them. They are all equally important. For instance, we have discussed about interoperability and data and information. It's more than that. We need interoperability at all layers of the ISGAN framework, for instance. So there are many gaps, and there is lots of effort to cover this, to bridge these gaps. So there is need of coordinated action from now and on in order to procure flexibility from all levels in a transparent and seamless manner.
I think there it's important to note that the markets have to become simpler. Like, it has to become easier for new flexibility service providers to access markets. And we can't do this if we have 27 different rule books. There must be some harmonization on an EU level to enable this. It is about a business model, and it should be about a European business model, in my opinion.
And if I may complement one more aspect, we see also all this pan-European frame that we are all trying to set up for flexibility procurement, but we also see more and more the cross-sector also integration and flexibility coming into this energy landscape. So we have the different vectors of the energy framework that they are coming closer and closer to interoperate between each other. So we really have to organize the electricity sector very well with very neat and clear regulation from roles and responsibilities, the market design, the product design.
Okay, that's really interesting. I think you also covered some other aspects, like the solution has to be a European one. We have to avoid like small national clusters. That's clear. Maybe going back to the let's say the initial question and connecting to the one that we have from the audience, the first one. Gerald asks, how do you propose to cover the let's say volatility that the flexibility, for example, from renewables has intrinsically? So, for example, from the variability of generation from PVs, or the non-responsiveness or limited responsiveness to demand response signal from customers. So these, what impact does it have? So the renewables or the customer acceptance and behavior, and what could be solutions that maybe in your projects you already have analyzed or that have come out as possible solutions to this issue, specific issue?
Sebastian, as you wish.
Yeah, I think that's a fair question. In the end, it's also about like storage opportunities, short and long term. We had 3 very large demos. I'm not sure to what extent work was done there. I'm convinced that they looked into it, but I don't want to say anything that they haven't done. But for us, the focus was on enabling markets, like making it possible to actually work at the first instance. This is definitely an issue that is important, but for us, it was about enabling markets and enabling new flexibility service providers to participate in these markets, which includes storage providers, obviously.
Also complementing a little bit this question. So actually, it's up to the users to create contractual relationships with some aggregators or FSPs. So it's not really a matter of penalization, because more the portfolio of a user can be enhanced with other controllable also assets. And for this purpose, there might be a proper contractual relationship with the aggregator in order to provide flexibility. But of course, we might see also other business models that the flexibilities themselves select the flexibilities of service providers that they wish to assigned contractual relationships. And so we might have, let's say, some more aggressive, let's say, penalizations for the user in these cases, for instance.
I think the question also underlines, again, the need for communication between TSOs, DSOs, and consumers to indicate or identify needs of flexibility or availabilities to reduce volatility on the grids. So I think in the end, we're back where we started. We have to increase coordination between all market participants. And that's the underlying goal of everything that we're doing.
Thank you. I mean, we are at the end, but I would like to at least go for one more question that connects also to the comment you have done previously, because there is a question on what is also from your point of view, the experience of the projects, the level of the practical implementation of flexibility services in Europe. So in both projects, you have different pilots, different countries involved. Probably you have a good overview of European implementation. So do you see a difference in how much some countries are advanced in implementing or exploring flexibility especially from renewables, and also in TSO-DSO coordination for using these flexibilities? What was your experiences in both projects?
So in our case, if I may, Sebastian, we had a very interesting demo in the Nordic Baltic area, where we had the common integrated market in the Nordic Baltics. And in this case, we had also actual demos, a real-life demo, where there was, this actually was under the mechanism of the open calls, where we had actual aggregators with, I do not recall the capacity, but they were stemming flexibility from electric water heat pumps. And there was actual participation into the balancing services. That was also a very good example with a very large-scale demonstration. But also coming to the question about which countries are more advanced, I believe it's important to define what we define as advanced, because we might also want to see the promotion also of local energy communities or citizen energy communities providing ancillary services in the grid, so as next steps. So I feel that there are, of course, different levels of the implementation of the flexibility services along Europe. So I don't know how fair it is to, let's say who is more advanced than the other, because we need to define what it is really advanced, let's say.
Yeah, I agree with Konstantinos, and we made similar experiences. What I would like to add on top of this is that it's all about the needs. For instance, from what I've understood, particularly in Sweden, there was really a need to exploit flexibility to postpone these grid reinforcements. So you could argue that they are more advanced, and they also have like a working flexibility market, I think in the Stockholm area. But it also comes down to needs, the urgency at stake. Yeah, and I think we're over time, so I don't want to extend it much more.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, there is a very last question, but we are indeed over time. I would ask, I don't know if do we have the time to, actually I see that.
Yes, Gianluca, go ahead please with the question.
Yeah, so since there is one which has a little bit of thumbs up, so this is maybe a little bit more tricky, and the question is, do you also have recommendations regarding the baseline methodology, especially for the provision and validation of demand response flexibility? So any baseline harmonization guidelines among the recommendations that you have, or additional to the ones that you identified in your common work?
That's actually a very good question, and it was a very challenging part of the implementation of the settlement process. Of course, with the need, we realized the need of obtaining submitted data from the flexibility service provider. It was quite challenging to resolve these, and there were certain also simplifications in the settlement process. but so far I would say that out of all the broad business processes of flexibility processes of the ASM report, the settlement is the one that needs a slight, let's say, enhancement due to the need of considering submitted data for the baseline calculations. Also, there is, of course, need to address the information exchange among the different market parties, with also the inclusion of the baseline calculations, such as the balanced responsible parties, the BSPs or flexibility service providers, beyond the transfer of energy, which is currently implemented across countries. So this essentially this should be pursued at a EU level to facilitate basically the optimal management of realization of the settlement process. So actually, giving also a realistic response, the baseline calculations, of course, it was considered, but with certain simplifications.
I'm honestly not sure on the CoordiNet side. I would refer to the deliverable and economic assessments. I think, feel more comfortable with that.
Okay, thanks. I mean, Konstantinos, I think did add a lot already on this question. So we have a very last one. Sorry for being over time, but makes sense to go also for this one. Since it's for both projects, and the question is if, for example, the project did already provide recommendation on the harmonized electricity market role model, or also on information exchange like SIM, IC SIM. So you mentioned already use cases, interoperability. What are the contributions or recommendations that from the projects were delivered into the harmonized electricity market role model, or in general to other standardization and interoperability activities?
So from interface project, I see my connection is a little bit unstable. Okay.
We can hear you clearly. Yeah.
Okay, nice. So from interface perspective, we have proposed, as said by Eric, both new roles or adaptations of the harmonized energy role model market, such as being honest, I do not recall all of them, but there were at least four propositions, such as the operator of a distribution TSO-DSO coordination platform, the metering data operator, and I do not recall the others, but there was much effort done and delivered also from NSOE as recommendations on the harmonized energy role model. At the same time, the EXA platform, the platform that the interface project delivered, essentially operates already with the so-called common information model from NSOE. So with the standards that Eric is referencing, so the CGMES for the grid data exchange and the ESMP for the different market profiles. And for this, throughout the work and the delivery of the interface project, we have realized several gaps into these standard data profiles, and those were proposed also into the EIC committee by NSOE, and they were of course also reported in our deliverables as well. In the joint paper, we have already discussed with Sebastian several more high-level recommendations, correct, Sebastian, about the roles and models, and of course the information and sharing topic about the standard data profiles as well.
I think talking about data models, it's also from our experience important to underline that there are very different levels of maturity, and you have to give time to market stakeholders to develop best practices, to develop which approaches work and which don't, and it takes time. So standardization should be the outcome, also talking about smart meter output. But it's not like a switch on and we have it. It's a work in progress, but it's a work in progress that is needed.
Okay, thank you. And yeah, I saw. Okay, thanks for answering this question. I see a very last question, but we are over time. Let me see. Okay, I will.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I will quickly read it for you. Then I think we will have to close. So the question is, do you have any recommendations for practical implementation of the Article 17? So the one that responds to our aggregation of the directive on electricity market design, and especially the settlement process in case of independent aggregators. It's something that you did look into in your projects.
Concrete recommendation. We've had one deliverable. It's called a CoordiNet roadmap, I think D6.7, and it explores this issue as well. It has, I think, 5 steps. What we expect, the CoordiNet project expects to happen, and I know that this is a part of it. But the major part for us was to call for incentives, to call for more support for system operators to enable flexibility. This is the main outcome we want to put out there, and I think this is directed at regulators and member states or institutions of member states to take a larger role in this, to support market stakeholders. But look at the CoordiNet roadmap. There's also a presentation on our website for a quick overview.
So from our side, it was explored in the technical way. So we have identified, as said previously, also the technicalities, the challenges, and the complexity of this case that is reported of independent aggregator. And of course, we have reported in a higher level and more generic level about the need for the determination of correction and compensation models related to the BRPs and their imbalances accordingly. So, but we didn't report any very specific recommendation in parallel to this Article 17. But we have explored all the, let's say, the necessary technicalities and complexities and for challenges that can be met when it comes to the independent aggregators.
Just the roadmap I mentioned, it's not published yet, but the presentation is on the website.
Okay, thanks for the clarification. I think we are over time, so I would say we can close the question and answer session. Probably I would add, yes, as it was mentioned by both the presenters, of course you can find, everyone can find more details on the website of the project. There are plenty of deliverables. The projects are running since some time now, so please refer there, and I would thank the presenters and the audience for the question, lively interaction, and I would leave the floor to Matteo for closing words.
Thank you, Gianluca. Thank you, Konstantinos. Thank you also, Sebastian, for sharing with us your experience, the experience of INTERRFACE and the CoordiNet project. Thank you.